Welcome to Women in the Arena podcast, the podcast celebrating women doing extraordinary things in plain sight. I'm your host, Audra Egan, and our mission is to elevate the value, strength, and resilience each woman brings to the world. Without further delay, let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining me for Season 4 of Women in the Arena podcast. This season, we are going to challenge ourselves. We are going to grow. We're going to stretch. We're going to push ourselves outside our comfort zone, and we're going to do some things that we have been dreaming to do. As I have said before, I may be the one behind the mic, but I don't do this by myself. I do this with all of you. Thank you all for joining me today, and let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome in, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me this week. This week, I am joined by a very incredible, industrious woman. I'm joined by Donna Rubin, and she is an advocate for the women's voice, which is absolutely appropriate not only for this show, but for the month of March, which is Women's History Month. She's been a journalist and a speechwriter. She is now spending the majority of her time digging through archives and out-of-print books, looking to find speeches that have been done by women. She is documenting them, and she has created the online archive, which is called Speaking While Female. It is the largest bank of speeches done by women in the world. Today, we are going to speak about the importance of using your voice, documenting it, and making sure you are heard. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Donna Rubin. Donna, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the show.
Audra, thank you. It's really a pleasure. I appreciate it.
I am very excited to talk to you because you are doing some amazing and unique work that I have not heard of anybody else doing. So you are digging through ancient, don't want to say ancient, but antique archives and documents and papers, looking for speeches that were done by women that haven't been well known or even published publicly. So what lent you to start this endeavor?
Well, that's exactly right. That's what I do. I used to have hobbies. I used to do a lot of things, but now I just spend my time looking for old speeches by women and more recent speeches by women. I've become obsessed with this topic when I realized that the history of speech as we have known it is completely lopsided. I'm a longtime speechwriter, so I've been focused for a long time on helping clients express themselves more powerfully in the workplace and in the public square. So I have been focused on speech and oral delivery of ideas and messaging. And one day I went to my bookshelf and I pulled down a volume that had been there for years. It is Lend Me Your Ears, Great Speeches in History, an anthology of speech collected by William Safire. Now, William Safire was a speechwriter for Richard Nixon. And for many, many years, he had a column in the New York Times. He used to write about language. I revered him. I read that column every week, and I looked up all the words I didn't know. I was quite nerdy when I was a high school student, and I loved him and I respected him a great deal. And I pulled down this volume out of curiosity, and I went to the table of contents, and I started counting up the number of speeches by men and the number of speeches by women. Now, this is oratory that has changed the world, oratory that has made an impact on the world, words that have resonated through history. And I counted them up, and there were 202 speeches by men and 15 speeches by women.
Wow. So he was implying that only 15 women throughout history around the world were worthy of documenting in his book.
Merited being in his book. Great Speeches in History, 202 men merited being there, and 15 women. And I looked at that and literally, I mean, well, not literally, literally is a figure of speech, but the scales fell from my eyes. I
Mhm.
looked at that and I just thought, this is so wrong. And I respect this man. He is at the acme of accepted, you know, in academic circles, in journalistic circles, in the gatekeepers of our culture. He's widely respected. Everybody considers him an authority. And this is his view on women's oratory. And I thought, I have to change that. I have to change that. So I launched this website called speakingwhilefemale.co, speakingwhilefemale.co, not .com, .co. And I just started throwing on there all the speeches by women that I could find. And at first, it was mostly speeches by women involved in the suffrage movement, of course, who I admire enormously, the Susan B. Anthonys and Elizabeth Cady Stantons and all the other women who spoke up so forcefully and in such great numbers for the women's vote from around 1860s, 1870s in the United States, Britain, and Europe, New Zealand, and Australia. But then I started branching out from there. And to my great discovery and great astonishment, there have been women speaking up for centuries on all kinds of subjects, on every topic under the sun, not just suffrage. And then I started throwing all those into the website. And then it just grew from there. And now I have at least 2,500 more than that speeches from women all over the world and across time.
Wow. What's your earliest speech that you have documented that you can think of?
I have a speech by Hortensia that she delivered in ancient Rome in 42 BC. That I think that's the earliest one. She spoke out against taxation without representation. She was the daughter of a vice consul in Rome, and the women of Rome were being taxed and the men were waging war. They were going to war, and she stood up and said, "Why are we paying taxes and we don't have a say in this decision? We do not want to go to war and we don't want to pay for it."
Wow.
And then,
Even that early.
and what's interesting also is that that taxation without representation theme is the same one that the suffragists used. So one of the interesting aspects of this project is you can see women speaking about the same themes throughout history. So what I did is I put the speeches in categories. I clumped them together in categories. The categories are kind of subjective because a lot of speeches could go in multiple categories. But what happens is you can look in a category, for example, marriage and divorce, reproductive issues, war and peace, medicine and health. I have 36 different categories. But what happens is when you click on and open any different category, you see speeches by women from hundreds of years ago right up to contemporary times speaking about the same issues, saying the same things. And that creates a kind of dialogue across the centuries from woman to woman, a continuous conversation, and it's exhilarating.
Well, I have two thoughts about that immediately. The first thought is what an amazing thing to ground ourselves all in, both here today as well as historically, that we've all collectively been concerned about the same things. That alone should be enough to unite all of us. That one fact alone. My second thought is, oh dear God, you mean we haven't been listened to throughout history? You mean we are continuing to yell and yell and yell about the same things and we're still not being listened to? Okay, that that makes me a little bit angry, if you want to know the truth. It makes me a little bit angry, but it also gives me more motivation to not only continue to on my quest of changing the world one woman at a time, but making sure that we're all connected. Documenting these speeches by women has not necessarily been a priority all this time. But now, if we've got this written documentation, this written history of women sharing their voices, this should give us, as modern day women that have the opportunity of having uh, the world at our fingertips, literally, like no other time in history, to unite and join our voices, because one voice is easy to ignore, but all of our voices are not.
Well, yes, I everything you say I completely agree with. We're on the same beam. But I will say this, it's not that women haven't made progress on every issue. On some issues, we haven't made a lot of progress, but on many issues that we've made tremendous progress on. I mean, for example, women now can vote. We have the vote. In most places around the world, there's a few exceptions, but in most places around the world, women can vote. But there are some, there's some issues that we can look and see that women have been saying the same thing over and over and over. And one of the disempowering things about this is that we realize that had we had access to this knowledge earlier, we would have known what women before us had said, and we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. We could have used and built on the knowledge of the past rather than feeling like we are the first ones to say these things and make these arguments. So it makes you wonder, why have I never heard about this woman? Why did I not have access to this woman's thinking and brain power, intellectual firepower? So by putting a spotlight on these women, we can see that women need to build on one another through a collective chain through history of argumentation.
So that is, like I said, that gives me hope, because now you are taking the very, very arduous task of doing the research and documenting each and every one of these speeches. So that gives me hope, because now we have a record. We have a record that we can refer to.
Well, like I said, I used to have hobbies. Now my only hobby is digging up speeches by women in history. So there's a number of places that I look for them. There are online digitized materials that were not available to historians or researchers like myself previously, because every day more and more books and old reviews and magazines and newspapers and publications are getting scanned and digitized. So that's one thing. There's also many, many old manuscripts and books, memoirs, diaries, legislative records that record where women stood up in a parliament or even a court of law and gave testimony. So all those are rich sources of rich veins of material that I mine. I mine them, and I take the women's words as long as they're in the public domain. I try to be very careful about what's about intellectual property rights, but as long as they're in the public domain, or I'm able to reach out to the rights holders and obtain permission, I put them on my site. And the site is free and available to every woman around the world who has an internet connection. Now, we know that that's not every woman around the world. A lot of places, women don't have access to the internet, or it's not free and uncensored. We know there's censorship taking place right now in Russia. Anywhere a woman has free access to the internet, women and girls should be able to go on the site, see what a powerful woman speaker looks like, read her words, in some cases, listen to her voice or see her on video, and get inspiration and knowledge from it. And the site will remain free in perpetuity. I'm making plans for it to live on without me, because I don't want the site to disappear one day because someone hasn't renewed the domain name.
You have a plan to try and correct the access problem for women that don't have access to a free and uncensored internet by writing a book. So, Donna, tell us a little bit about the book you're writing about these speeches.
So the book is going to be a collection of speeches by American women, and by American I mean US women. Sadly, not other women from other parts of America, but just US women. And it's the story of America told through women's voices. Women have been speaking through colonial times, through the 19th century, through the Civil War and Reconstruction and aftermath, World War I and World War II, the women's movement, civil rights movement. In every epoch of American history, women's voices have been there, sharing their experiences, their intellectual content. And this book is going to tell the story of America through women's eyes and through women's voices. It's going to be called Speaking While Female 50 Extraordinary Speeches by American Women. And some of the women you will have heard of. There will be, of course, the Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony's. There will be the Helen Keller and other women that are well known, um, Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan. These are all women who regularly appear in best speeches lists. But there will be lots of other women who you've never heard of who deserve to be heard and whose stories should be in every American history book, in every social studies, and every civics book. So I'm hoping that this book will be used by educators and be available for classrooms to augment our accepted curriculum.
One of the speakers that you are going to have in your book is Clara Foltz. Who was she and what was her speech?
She was a remarkable, remarkable woman. She was the first lawyer in California. In fact, she was the first female lawyer. In fact, she was the first female lawyer on the West Coast. But she
Wow.
didn't get there by accident. She had 5 children, and her husband abandoned her. Not an unusual thing to happen, and she had to support her family. The first thing she did is she was a gifted speaker, and she went out on the speaking circuit and was a public speaker, and that's how she first made a living. But then she really wanted to go to law school. She had a burning ambition to be a lawyer, that she could not take the bar exam in California because the bar exam was only offered to white men who were 21 years older. So she and her good friend and ally, Laura DeForce Gordon, put together an amendment to the state of California. And they, by hook or crook, they got this amendment passed that allowed women to take the bar exam. And she and Laura DeForce Gordon studied for the bar. They actually studied privately together in a law office and were able to pass the bar. But then she wanted to study law at the Hastings School of Law in San Francisco, and it was closed to women. So what did she do? I believe she also worked with Laura DeForce Gordon on this initiative too. She sued the law school, and she won the lawsuit. Unfortunately, by that time, she was working as she was practicing as a lawyer, and she didn't have the time and the resources to go back to law school. So she never went to law school, but she practiced as a lawyer, and a lot of her legal work was in the courtroom, actually taking place in the courtroom. She did a lot of domestic lawsuits and, things that would take her in the courtroom. And she could see that there was an imbalance in the courtroom, and the prosecutor had way, way, way more power than the defendant. The prosecutor had government money. The prosecutor was always a powerful man, and the whole courtroom dynamic was tilted towards the prosecutor. And she felt strongly that in our American system of law, each of us is innocent until proven guilty. So that means it's incumbent upon the court to defend and support the defendant and protect the defendant until such time as that person is proven guilty. So up until the time that a judge or a jury says you're guilty, you're considered innocent, but the defendants were getting mowed over by the prosecutor, just mowed over and going to jail. So she said we should have a publicly funded system. We should have government money defending the poor and the indigent in court. And she gave a speech about it in 1893, and she was the first person to come up with the idea of a public defender system. And then, of course, the first public defender system came into practice. I think it took about 20, 30 years. But anyway, it was in California. Now, all across the United States, we have public defender systems. Everybody criticizes them and says they're terrible. They don't get enough funding. They don't work right. Well, that's probably true. But we wouldn't have them at all if it weren't for Clara Shortridge Foltz. She was the woman who saw the need for it and pressed for it. And later, the women, I mean, quite recently, like in the last 15 years or so, women students at Hastings College of Law pressed that for her to get a posthumous law degree, which she did. And now there's a courtroom, a courthouse, a federal court building named for her in Los Angeles, the Clara Shortridge Foltz Law Building. So she's finally getting her due in a few places, but not widely enough.
No, I have never heard that story. That's certainly something that I never heard in college. I don't know how many have heard that.
And it's
In, I mean, it's a framework of our judicial system. I mean,
well,
that's basic
it is
as far
basic.
as we know it.
And on the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., are engraved the words equal justice under law. And she believed in it, equal justice under law, and she saw a practical way to apply that. And it's notable that she shared her insight and her fix for the problem, her practical fix for the problem. She shared it in a speech. And that speech was not available until I dug it up and put it on my website. And I won't really take full credit for that. There's a wonderful woman named Barbara Babcock. She was an esteemed law professor at Stanford, and she wrote a biography of Clara Foltz. And I talked to Barbara Babcock a couple years ago, not long before she passed away of breast cancer. And she told me she'd been searching and searching for this speech by Clara Foltz and never could find it. And I was able to find it. But of course, I think the reason I found it so easily is because all this material has been digitized. And it probably wasn't when Barbara Babcock was looking for it. But I found the speech, and that was a banner day for me. I was exhilarated when I found that speech and put it up on the website for everybody to see and appreciate.
Is there a phrase in the speech that speaks out to you? Because I know the speech is actually quite long, but is there a phrase in there that really jumps out to you and it speaks to you about how strong and powerful a woman she really was?
Yes, there is, in fact. The speech is called, by the way, Public Defender Rights of Persons Accused of Crime. It was delivered on August 8th, 1893, at the Chicago World's Fair. And here's the quote that really strikes my heart. It's so powerful. It really is very deeply meaningful to me. Let the criminal courts be reorganized upon a basis of exact, equal, and free justice. Let our country be broad and generous enough to make the law a shield as well as a sword. Let the citizen understand that his flag is his protection in his home as well as when his foot is on foreign soil, and there will come to the state as a natural sequence all the blessings which flow from constitutional obligations conscientiously kept and government duties sacredly performed.
What a powerful speech, and from a woman that never went to law school. This was just a an innate gift that she harnessed and used it. I mean, that's definitely an example of someone who is in touch with their purpose of why they're on this earth to begin with.
Clara Foltz had the insight and the depth of reasoning and compassion to understand that there's a difference between law and justice. You know, laws are laws on the books, laws are laws made by legislatures, laws are laws made by justices, but laws don't apply themselves automatically. It's human beings that apply the laws and make sure that justice prevails. And she understood the difference.
Yes, and I know that that's something that we still fight to this day. There is a significant difference between law and justice because laws can be interpreted and they're interpreted by humans and humans are imperfect. So there's clearly still a lot of work to be done in that area. So I salute Clara Foltz for being the trailblazer in that effort. Is there another woman that you can share with us that is in your book that is again is an amazing example of women that have been doing this throughout history? They just weren't given their credit.
Well, I would like to mention another Sarah, actually, same first
Mm-hmm.
name, Sarah Winnemucca.
Okay.
She was a member of the Northern Paiute tribe. It was an indigenous tribe that, well, still exists, but it used to occupy their homeland, ranged from parts of California up into Oregon and over into Nevada. And of course, indigenous people lived on the land, and as far as they could see, I, they were, they would roam around depending on the seasons and whatever was available to eat and whatever they could, hunt. And they would live on the land. And it wasn't until Anglo settlers came and said this land belongs to us and put up fences that the indigenous people were threatened, and their way of life completely destroyed, and the land was taken from them. And she and her family were fell prey to this, and the Northern Paiutes ended up in dispute with the Anglos, with the settlers. And she was a skillful speaker and performer. She had performed with her family in San Francisco, and so she knew English very well. She was an interpreter, kind of a go-between. And she actually went to Washington, D.C. and testified before Congress to congressmen. In 1897, I believe, 1890s anyway, she was not the first indigenous woman to testify before Congress. I think she was the second. The first that I know of is a woman named Geppetta. But Sarah Winnemucca testified before congressmen and told them this story about how her people, the Northern Paiutes, had been forced off of their homeland, their ancestral homeland. They were forced to march 350 miles north to a territory called Yakima Territory. It's in southern Washington state, but they went through the mountains, three different mountain range in the dead of winter. And it was so cold, they weren't prepared. They didn't have the right clothing and protection. It was freezing, and old men and babies died along the way. And the ground was so hard, they couldn't even bury the bodies. The little bodies of the babies had to be left by the roadside. And she went to Congress and she told this story. She went to Congress and she told this story, and it is heartbreaking. And it should be in every American history textbook. Unfortunately, Sarah Winnemucca really didn't make a big impact with her words at the time. She was pleading for the federal government to give her people not their original homeland. She didn't ask for them to be allowed back to their original territory, but she asked for them to be allowed onto other land, fertile territory, because where they were was completely unfertile and they couldn't live there, prosperously. But she really didn't get what she asked for, and she was kind of like a voice, a cry in the wild. It's really very sad. Now she wrote her autobiography, Life Among the Paiutes, and that is what historians think is the first autobiography or memoir by an Indigenous woman. And it's available today on Amazon. Life Among the Paiutes by Sarah Winnemucca.
Wow. Do you have a sample of that speech? I'm sure that it is incredibly powerful and probably just will just tear your soul apart, because this is not something that is unheard of right now. We have quite a few of Indigenous people that are saying the same thing today, and unfortunately, it's going unheard.
This is from Sarah Winnemucca's speech, her testimony to the U.S. Congress on Indian Affairs on April 22nd, 1884. The order came in December. Imagine what a severe winter it is out there at that time. They could not disobey this order, although everything was said that could be said in our defense, but we took up the march And the soldiers had good buffalo shoes and buffalo robes and prepared for their comfort. And here were my people. They were poor and had no clothing and no blankets and no buffalo robes and nothing to make them warm because we did not belong to a buffalo country. We took up our march and marched over drifting snow, my people carrying their little children. Well, it took us a good time. This was the way my people marched 300 miles, and the dear little children strung alongside of the road, frozen to death, for nothing but to punish us. Sometimes a wagon would be left behind, too late to get in on account of the snowstorm, and an old man would be left in the wagon. And when we would go back the next day to get the wagon, he would be found frozen to death. My people's dead bodies were strung all along the road across the Columbia River to this Yakima reservation.
Oh my gosh. The visual of that is it's heartbreaking. And unfortunately, it didn't make an impact then, but hopefully we can help her words make an impact now. And that's the whole point of your project. That's the whole point of your book. But you need some help with your book, and you have a Kickstarter program. And we wanted to make sure that we raise some awareness in regards to that program now, because this book needs to be completed. It needs to be published. It needs to be put in everybody's hands. This is history that many of us have never heard. This is real history, and it needs to be known. So how can we help you get this in people's hands?
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'm publishing a book. It's called Speaking While Female 50 Extraordinary Speeches by American Women. And I did not go to a mainstream publisher. I decided to publish it myself. And I am raising the money to do that on Kickstarter. Now, I set my funding goal very low because I wanted to make sure that I would hit it. And on Kickstarter, it's all or nothing. If you don't make your goal, you don't get a cent. So I set it very low, and we hit the fundraising goal on the first day, which is thrilling. We made $22,000, but I need twice that much to pay the publisher so we can have our first print run of 2,500 books, hardbound books, and that will allow us to get the books into bookstores and into libraries. So I'm still quite aggressively hustling to raise money for the Kickstarter. If you go on Kickstarter, you'll see a variety of reward tiers. And of course, you can just donate money if you want. You can order a book. Well, you can buy 2 books and have one donated to Girls Inc. They're happy to get them, and they're going to create some programming around this and give books to the participants in their program. Or you can order a number of other things, but books and et cetera, and talks. But the point is just to go on the site and support us a little bit. Just go on the site and give us a little bit of support, because every little bit will help us reach our goal.
So we are going to make sure that everybody has access to your site. So in my link tree on Instagram, I'm going to put a link to your site as well as to your Kickstarter, so everybody can check that out. And what if people have questions or further questions and want to connect with you? How would they do that?
Oh, it's very easy to connect with me. First of all, my email is on the website, speakingwhilefemale.co. It's on my LinkedIn profile. I make it very easy to get to me. I am a very active and joyful LinkedIn user. I post almost every day on LinkedIn about women's voices, and I have a really, really nice, engaged, supportive community on LinkedIn. So that's another great way to connect with me. I'm also on Instagram. I'm not a big Instagram user, but I'm trying to post every day. And I'm on Twitter. So there's a lot of different ways. And I have a YouTube channel also. So there's a lot of different ways to reach me. And I love interacting with people and learning from people. So my area of focus is very narrow. It's women's speech and history, but it's also very broad. And of course, there is absolutely no way I could master all the information about history, women's history in context from pre-colonial, colonial period up to the present. So I am constantly getting corrected, or my material is amplified or put in context by other experts and knowledgeable people, and I really welcome that. I welcome all the interaction and all the engagement and all the friendship that people have to offer.
And I can attest to this. Donna actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. That's how we connected. That's how she found me. And we're kindred spirits. We are after the same thing. And we want to change the world, literally one woman at a time. She's doing it with speeches. I'm doing it with interviews. So whatever support that you can give her, it is greatly appreciated. It will help shape our futures. We need to get this history in everybody's hands and know that there are women that have come before us with the same concerns, with the same issues, and speaking out about the same things. So maybe we can ground ourselves in history, unite with each other, and have one collective voice heard and get some stuff done. Like I said earlier, it's really hard to ignore a crowd saying the same thing. Donna, before I let you go, will you share with us one last speech, one that has spoken to you and is profound?
Oh,
Not that
yeah.
they're not that none of them are not profound, but some just sit with you longer than others.
Well, I'll share with you a speech that I posted yesterday on LinkedIn that has really been on my mind lately. And it's because of recent events in Ukraine and in Russia. So, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was First Lady, in 1941, she went to Chicago and gave a speech to the Civil Liberties Union there. And she talked about how important it was to preserve free speech, freedom of assembly, and free press. And this was a time in American history when there was enormous fear of getting into World War II. The war had already begun in Europe, but the United States wasn't involved yet. This was before Pearl Harbor. And there was tremendous fear of communists. And Eleanor Roosevelt made a very, very powerful argument that we have nothing to fear from free speech. People should be able to say anything they want, and in a democracy, we have to trust that the best ideas will prevail, but we shouldn't curtail anyone's speech or right to protest or say whatever they want, including the most radical among us. So she said, here's what she said. You've got to be willing to listen, to allow people to state any point of view they may have or to say anything they may believe, and then to trust that. When there has been free discussion and really free, uninfluenced expression in the press, in the end, the majority of the people will have the wisdom to decide what's right. The reason that this strikes me as so powerful right now is because we're seeing what's happening in Russia. Russia has been led by an autocratic regime that doesn't allow the free press in. And of course, now the press is heavily censored. And Russian people actually believe that Ukraine is their enemy and that they're not even allowed to use the words war or invasion. If you use those terms to describe what's going on in Ukraine, you can be sent to jail for 15 years in Russia. So Russia does not have free speech. It doesn't have freedom of assembly. It doesn't have a free press. And Eleanor Roosevelt, speaking in 1940, which was 60 plus years ago, is actually speaking to us today.
Wow. Again, the reason why this type of history needs to be published. And I thank you for giving up all of your hobbies and concentrating on this, because this is such a worthy cause and something that we all not only can we use, but we absolutely need. So once again, I will be posting on our link tree on Instagram her website as well as her Kickstarter. Donna, thank you again for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing with us your journey and introducing us to some of these women that have formed history.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed our talk, and I appreciate your help spreading the word about women's voices.
This is definitely my pleasure and my passion. So thank you, and thanks to all of you for listening, and we'll see you again next time. That's our show. Thank you all so much for spending your time with me and continuing to support this show, this community, and our endeavor to change the world one interview at a time. If you have any ideas for a new show or for a guest that you'd like me to interview, please reach out to me at audra@womeninthearena.net. Thank you again for all of your support, and we'll see you again next time.
This is just the beginning.
That's our show. I am so grateful for each and every one of you and your unwavering support and your continued belief in this movement that has become much bigger than me, much bigger than just a podcast. It has become this forward momentum that we are all doing together. If you are ready, or you know somebody that is ready to tell your story and share your value with the world, please connect with me. You can reach me at audra@womeninthearena.net. I am so honored and thankful that you will share your story with me, and I'll make sure that it is well taken care of. I will never stop thanking each and every one of you, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next week as we share another woman's story and we celebrate her doing extraordinary things in plain sight. We'll see you next time.